Hi, Eva here. Today I'm going to show you how to paint a peach blossom branch from this photo I took in China. Enjoy! So that was Antwerp blue, and I'm going to get a little bit more. So it's really important that you don't get your so tiny puddles that you run out halfway through. When we do wet into wet, which means we're going to wet the paper and then we're going to put the colors on and let them mix and mingle directly on the paper. The paper needs to stay wet while we do that. If it starts drying, the pigment slows down and it stops and you'll get lines, and I don't want any lines in the background. I just want everything fuzzy, everything kind of soft edges. And I think I might just put a puddle of some red out too, just in case I decide I want it. Can you see this one? How much more I have to clean my brush out? Yeah, with the blue. Because this particular blue is a staining color. Colors have different properties. Some are staining, meaning that they kind of soak into the paper. Others are non-staining, like the Cobalt blue is non-staining. The yellow is a little bit staining. This one's definitely staining. And you can also see I have 2 glasses of water. And one I use to clean out my brush, and that way I can keep the other water clean so that I don't have really dirty dishwash brownish water that I'm mixing my colors with, because then they get really they get dull really fast. And I like bright colors. And if I want them dulled down, I want to do it myself, not with dirty water. So a little bit of this red here I'm taking, that's Quinacridone red. But whatever red you have, and if you want to take some different colors, like some of you said purple maybe, there is no law against purple. There's complete and utter artistic freedom in my class. Can you see what happened now? Now we basically have rinsed out blue, yellow, and red, the 3 primary colors. And now look at my water, kind of grayish. It's if it's something we wanted, we call it neutrals. If it's something that's oops, I didn't want it to get that murky. I mean, it doesn't matter with this water, but if it was something I was painting, then we call it mud. And we are always trying to avoid mud in our watercolors.
Would you use that water if you wanted to make a little shadow or something?
No,
Okay.
I wouldn't. I would mix it here because this is very watered down. And yeah, I usually don't like to use my dirty water to mix colors with. So I wouldn't use that. I mean, but hey, you see other painters, you see lots of painters that they paint with one container, they paint with the dirtiest water I ever saw, and I'm like, ugh! And they get beautiful paintings, So it's just my little thing. So now you can see I grab a much bigger brush. It's called a wash brush, but whatever brush you have, it's the hake brush would be good, or even one of those cheap hawk hair brushes. Anything that'll hold a lot of water would be a good thing. And then right when I'm going to do that, can you see here I have a little bit of a smudge of some graphite on there. I don't like that. Again, I'm a little particular with this kind of stuff. So meticulous, thank you. I was going to say the A word, but picky, yes. But I'm trying to clean up my language here. So, all right. And the thing about this drawing, can you see, you could actually, there's no, you could have it like this. You could totally have it like that. Sometimes, if something happens in the background where one way or another would look better, you can totally do it. So that gives us extra freedom here. Okay, so I got my puddles, I got my brushes, and I got the smudge off. And so I'm just going to put some water around here, and I'm trying to stay out of the flowers. That's why you didn't have to put the masking on. You could totally do it without the masking. Then you just have to be a little bit more careful, or be okay with it being a little bit of a looser interpretation. We'll see how this works out.
We'll see.
So I'm just putting water around, and you know how it goes with this. Since we're doing wet into wet, we gotta take some time to get the water to sink into the paper, and I need to go in and grab a brush that's a little bit smaller to get. Can you see? Yes. Can you see where I put the? And you can see. I have a lot of areas where maybe I should get in a little bit closer, and that's going to be easier with a wet, smaller brush. So I'm just trying, and actually, honestly, the little branches there, if you get color in them, it really doesn't matter because they're going to be very dark. It really wouldn't matter. And I'm going to keep my background very loose, and you can see this little branch I have here, that's also a very loose interpretation. I want that more fuzzy than the others, because I want to say it's a little bit more in the background. When things are in the background, they'll look less defined. They'll be not as bright colors, and the lines will be a little bit more fuzzy, not so hard. That's how you say things are in the background. So it's like when you take a photograph, sometimes you can put it so that some areas that you don't want to emphasize, they can be out of focus. That's really what it is, out of focus a little bit. So now I'm gonna, so you can't, when it's lying like this, I can't really see if I have some dry spots where I don't want it. So that's why I always have to lift it up, and you will too. That's telltale sign of watercolor is we're always like this, looking at the shine of the paper, and the shinier the paper is, the wetter it is. The wetter the paper is, the faster the colors run, and the more they get diluted, of course, because there's more water. And right now, I don't want anything dark, but I want some color. I don't want white background. And I think this particular painting, if I'm having a background that is fairly light, I usually, it's not always like that, because sometimes I'll change my mind. I thought I wanted it white, and then when I'm done, I'm like, nah, don't like it. Sometimes when I want a lighter background, most of the time when I want a lighter background, I should say, I like to get it on first. And if in some paintings, so you can see behind me, in some paintings, I like to have really dark behind my florals. It really, really pushes them out.
The poinsettia, we did the flowers first.
Yes, we did the flowers first. And when I want really dark backgrounds, that's what I do. I paint the flowers first, and then I paint the super dark background last. And the reason I do that, can you see now my paper buckles a little bit? I'm painting on 140 pound today. A lot of times I paint on 300 pounds, which is thicker, and it doesn't buckle as much, but it still buckles a little bit when you wet everything. So I'm just kind of looking at where I'm at, and then I'm going to take a spray bottle, and I'm just going to spray the back, and you can see I'm holding it up. I don't turn it over and lay this wet paper down on my dirty board, because then I would get all sorts of dirt picked up from there. So don't want that. All right, so now it's also wet on the back, and that will actually make it lay flat in a bit. It should make it lay flat in a bit. Of course, all those flowers in the middle, that's a dry piece of paper. What happens is the fibers of the paper soak up all that water, and the water gets bigger. All those little fibers get bigger. And then when it's dry, they're still small. And so that's what makes it buckle. So most of the time, like I don't stretch my paper. And actually, I like to even spray it a little bit out here, just to make sure that it's really wet, because I want to keep it nice and light. And now I'm going to go in. I usually start with what I like to call my chicken color. It's my cobalt blue, because it's so forgiving. If it ends up somewhere where I don't want it, it's easy to lift it, where we already saw that the Antwerp blue is not quite like that. So I'm just, you can see there's no really rhyme or reason here, just getting some color on. And I try to go in here and make sure I have some color in between these little areas. Is this an area or is this not an area? This is an area. Talk to yourself. Now it is, exactly. So now I'm going to put a little bit of the yellow in, here and there and here. So in my imagination, that's gonna say a little bit about, and I don't mind if I put a little bit of that red in a couple of places. And I didn't even clean out my brush, so you can see I actually get some neutrals, because can you see how that went neutral? But I like that, it's out in the corners. You don't want anything out on the edges too bright. Because, you know, we want to have the viewer look here, or maybe here, but not out here. All right. So I'm gonna clean it out a little bit, and now, since I have it, I'm gonna put a little bit of this one in. And now I got into my little flower.
What was that?
That is my Antwerp blue. Can you see what a different blue that is? If you get into one of the little flowers, just, you know, grab a piece of Kleenex, and while it's wet, you just pick it up. It's no big deal. And see how, because everything's wet, it's just mixing and mingling so nicely. Look at that pretty gray. See, I know that there's gonna be some green right here, that little bud, so I don't really want green up against that, if I can help it. And I don't mind some bright greens that are fading out a couple of places, and now I just have basically a little bit dirty water on. And if I get in, see, I just lift it out right away, and then it's no big deal. Of course, it can be these are kind of complicated shapes, some of them. And out here, and I am trying, can you see here? Can you see here how I'm getting a hard edge? Because I obviously did not wet that part off the paper very well. And so I better get rid of that while I can. And let's get a little bit more of that yellow up here.
I'm surprised how pretty the yellow ended up.
Pardon me?
I said, for me, seeing all that yellow, I was surprised how well it turned out.
Yeah.
On the palette,
Yeah.
here it looks, woo.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, so that yellow that I love, this one here, it is transparent yellow, and it looks so deceiving in the palette. It looks like baby poo. We have already established that in previous classes. And it's my favorite yellow. Here, I don't mind so much that I'm painting over there, because, you know, that's going to be in the background, and plus it's going to be darker, so I can paint over it. And then I'm also conscious of trying to have not one color on one side of the stem here, and then a completely different color on the other side, because then it looks like the stem is a border, and I want to say this is background that's continuing behind it. So even though this is very loose, there is some thought to it. And then there's some areas where I have like this, I like it. I just want to make sure I don't have any hard edges anywhere, because the hard edges are going to be the flowers and the branches and all that stuff. All right, so far so good. I don't think I have any, I do have something going on. Can you see I have blue here, and then I have that yellow-green there. That doesn't look really all that convincing, does it? So we better get some of that yellow in there. So look at your painting. I mean, this is kind of, I mean, don't get stressed, but it's, you know, it's one of those where you can't fiddle around too long. Just get it done and look at it. And if you see a hard edge forming somewhere where it doesn't belong, get rid of it if you can. And so now I'm gonna just try and maybe take a little bit of red on here. This is just totally experimental, but I'm gonna splatter in a little bit of red.
Why is that?
Because I'm gonna say that maybe there are some other of those little flowers in the background. There's kind of, you know, just a little indication of possibly. Not, you know, I don't want it too bright, but they all flared out nicely. And then if I splattered inside here, if I have any other things going on inside any of the petals, I have one other little problem area that I am just noticing, and that's in here. Can you see I didn't finish in here? So I just need to go in there before things dry, get that. And then a little bit of that color on this side.
So you really wanted to accentuate the yellow.
Yes, and I like the yellow here, because then I'm thinking that's where my light's going to come from.
So you're
Yellow
gonna
is-
hold it that way.
Yeah. So I think I have a little dry area here. I think I should probably stop while I'm ahead. That's my thought. Yeah,
How about inside in that flowers and?
yeah, here. So that's fine if there's little worms in them. And on these here, I don't mind so much. What? So can you see here? So some of them, I like to have it like really light some of those areas because then the flowers can flow out. And that's why I think whatever you have going on might even splatter a little bit of yellow in here now that I'm getting braver.
You're in that splatter.
Yeah, I just don't want it too tight. And while things are still damp/wet, I know everything diffuses.
You know that. How similar to the phthalo is the Antwerp balloon? Is it pretty similar?
Yeah. Phthalo is just even more staining. All right, so here we are, no masking fluid on, and I can't see all my lines. I'm gonna start with the easy ones. Let's start out on it's a little bit of masking. Let's start out on the edges where it's a little not so important. So we can kind of get our feet wet here. So I have this lovely little bud. And I broke one of my own rules. What rule did I break? I'm okay. I broke the rule of mixing my puddles, but it just so happened that I lucked out that I had some of that pink there. So I'm going to put a little bit of that opera rose in on this one here. And I might, without rinsing out my brush, might put a little bit of blue in. That's that cobalt blue. It's very watery. The cobalt blue and that opera rose, they're going to make like a lovely little kind of lavender. So it kind of tones it down a little bit. So I ran that in. See that? And while that's kind of getting to where it needs to go, it's very wet. So I need to let it dry just a little bit. I'm going to take, maybe I should just get myself a bigger puddle of this pink. That might be a good idea. And here, since that's such a little area, I might just do a little bit of the pink right here on dry. Then I rinse out my brush, dab it on my water control station. That's a very important part. Now I needed my brush to be just damp. And then before it dries, I'm going to kind of mush it out, pull it out, giving it a little bit of water where to run. I might take a little tiny bit of the cobalt blue on, put it on here. And then I'm keeping an eye on that other one. It's still very wet. This one's not as wet. So then I can go in and take a little bit, maybe a little bit thicker, a little bit of the cobalt blue here. And then without even rinsing it out, I'm going to take a tiny little bit of the yellow and give it kind of a little green there. So, and see, I did it while it was still wet because I wanted that soft transition. Because I don't want to say too much about these little buds out here. They're not that important. And now I have green on here. Kind of, I do, because I have blue and yellow on. So I can do the same here while it's still damp. And see how then it just kind of blends together nicely. I can do a little bit of that green up here. I know I'm going to do a little green there. And I can even do a little bit here. There's that. Rinse it out. Now go the opposite way. I'm going to take a little bit of the pink. Put it out at the tip of these buds. You don't have to do two like I'm doing here. It's just because I feel I can probably get to it in time. Take a tiny little bit of the blue and let it run down like that. Probably clean it out again would be a good thing. A little bit more blue here. And then before this pink. There's some nice little buds that are not very, they're just kind of saying little buds. But I'm not giving them a lot of detail or anything because they're way out here. So those are just our little loose ones.
Okay, on the tips is the pink.
Yeah, so on the tip is the pink. I can do one more. So I can do this one so you can see it one more time. And here, I'm gonna give it that little bit of pink. And I could wet it here. I did it on dry. So if I do it on dry, I gotta be quick. I'm gonna take a little tiny bit of that very watered down blue and put a little bit of that on so it kind of becomes lavender. And I'm gonna rinse it out. And then I'm gonna take a little bit of the blue and I can put it down here. So here I just did it with the blue. And what do I want to do now if I want it green? I'm going to have to put a little yellow in, right? So I put some yellow in here. And there it is. And see how you get that lovely soft transition. Those are those little out of focus buds. So those are nice and easy to start with. I always like to kind of tiptoe into my painting until I kind of get a feel for it, instead of starting with the star of the show and then I mess it up and then I'm like, So here, if something doesn't go quite right, it's not so bad. It's not so bad. So why don't you try that for starters? If yours is dry enough to take the masking off. If it's not, don't do it. Okay, so masking's off and this has dried. And I'm just trying to get a little bit of this imperfection out of my little petals here. Doesn't matter so much, but still would like to do it. There, you can see this is just toned it down a little bit. Maybe a little bit on this one too. And also I don't mind if I can get these lines here, like the outside of some of the petals, a little softer. Of course, that's the thing about masking fluid. It gets really, you get hard lines. That you end up with a lot of hard lines. So that's kind of like the price we pay. So looking at some of these petals in this photograph, you can see they're kind of a little darker pink towards the middle, and then they get a little bit lighter. I'm painting this one here. And so I like to paint them one petal at a time. And I like to do it, most of the time, I like to do it wet on wet. Now, I could, if I wanted to be really, really picky and particular, I could mask out some of those little stamens because some of them are lighter, but most of them are darker. And I'm not going to mask them out. Most of them are darker. You can see that, a few of them, the light catches on and then they'll look a little lighter. I'm not going to worry about that. That's what white pens and white paint is for. Shh, don't tell Transparent Watercolor Society, we'll get in trouble. I'm just not going to be that fussy with this. So I'm putting water inside a petal, but you can see I'm not going all the way out to the lines. I'm leaving a little room for the paint to travel. And I should have gotten myself a little bit more of the pink, but now I got it. And I also have a little bit of the red there, so that's good, because I might need some of that. So I'm going to use just a round brush, make sure it's not too wet. And I'm starting at the bottom of the petal. And this petal is a little bit behind that other petal here. Can you see that? In the drawing here. I'm painting this one. Painting this one. And you can see this petal here is on top of it. So I'm painting, and that way I'm outlining the edge of that other petal, right? And then I'm going down here. I might even dip into a little tiny bit of my Quinacridone red and dab it in. Can you see how it flows by itself? I love when it does that. It does my work, It works for me. And now I rinsed out my brush and I put a little tiny bit of cobalt blue on. Need to put a little bit. I just like to put a little bit in here.
What did you start with? Sorry.
Opera Rose, and too much water on my brush. And now I'm just going to gently guide this color out to the edges, like here, just so it's barely. It's almost white out there. And I might just take a little bit more on my tip, which is a mixture of the opera and the I put a little bit of the Quinacridone gold in. just to give it a little bit of that feeling of, and a little bit more color, like right there in the center. And I'm just kind of smoothing it out. Can you see that? So there's one. Now I cannot paint the one next to it. Well, I could, but they would all run together and it'll give me backgrounds and stuff. So these two petals are out, but let's see, I could paint this one. This one, I can barely see this one. Now I see it. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a little bit of water in, and you can see how nicely I can control where the pigment goes by where I put the water in. So now I put a little tiny bit of water in there. You see that? Of course, it's not that much of that petal we can see. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I might do it a little bit more of the Quinacridone red and then a little bit of the pink on. And I'm going to just dab that color in. See, I'm just touching with the tip of my brush, and the color ran off my brush and spread out into that water I deposited. That's what I wanted. Now I have to rinse my brush out, because now I want to just use that pigment I deposited. And I went on my water control station and I dabbed my brush so I don't have it dripping wet. And then just with the tip of my brush, I can guide that color out towards the edge here. So there's that. And it's going to go behind that other petal that's in the front. I might even go in with a little tiny bit of cobalt blue. Very little, and I'm just dabbing in a little bit. Blue pushes back. And so if I want to say that that petal is behind the other one, it's kind of nice if I can get a little bit of the blue, and it'll mix with the red and be kind of like a lavender, but it's like there will be a little tiny bit of a shadow on there. So there's that. And right now I can't really paint any of the other ones. So instead I could go over here to one of these little buds. And so here, these buds out here, I didn't give them any detail. But now these are more, towards the focal point, the focal area, which is, this branch here. So I'll give them a little bit more detail. So let's see, I'll take a little bit of the Opera Rose and put that in there.
And you didn't wet it.
I didn't wet it. Such a tiny little area. I feel that I should be able to kind of get around. And then I rinsed out my brush, and now I'm pulling it out. So can you see it? Then it's just faint pink there. And so that's one of the little petals. It's beginning to come out like this. And I can't paint anything that touches. But there's another little one back here. I wonder, I think it'll be kind of pinkish red. So I'll put a little bit of that in there, and I'll do it a little darker. And then I rinsed out my brush, and I'm going to pull that color out. So that's another little tiny petal right there. There's that. And then I think this one's probably dry enough now. So I can paint another little section here. Might do that also with a kind of a reddish pink. This one here. So I make it darker down here in the bottom. And again, I do it on dry paper, but you got to be a little fast because, I don't want it to dry and then get a hard line inside the petal. So I rinsed out my brush, dab, 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 before this. And then with the tip of a damp brush, I'm kind of dragging that pigment out so that it becomes lighter and lighter and lighter. And like that. Can you see how it gives its shape? It's always darker down here. The light doesn't shine as much down there. It's more concentrated. It gets these other petals that are over it. It cast, they cast like shadows. So it'll be darker down there. And the more you get out to the tip, it'll be lighter. And also the light's coming from here, so it's going to hit there. It's not going to hit down there. because there's a petal, or petal on top of it. All right, so that's good. And let's see, I have one more here. I'm thinking, let's see here. So I'm thinking, they have like cover. So let's test out our colors that we will want to use for our greens. So I have my Antwerp here, which I have Antwerp in my background, right? Antwerp blue. And I also have Cobalt blue, which I also have in my background. And I have the yellow, which I also have in my background. So I wanted to show you that depending on, and that's why I like to use at least 2 blues for florals and other, vegetation type things, if I need greens in general, I should say, not just for that. So my Cobalt was very, very watery, so now I'm just going back into the pigment and loading it up so it becomes more pigment loaded, because I need a little bit stronger color now, and for stronger color I need more pigment. I did turn it on good. So I want to test out. So let's take a little bit over here and a little bit of the yellow. So a little bit more yellow. So you can see that's kind of a nice little subdued green I'm getting there, right? And maybe I should get a little bit more. Can take a little bit more yellow in there. There, since it's spring, want more yellow. All right, so that's one green I would get from the Cobalt and the transparent yellow. And I'm gonna, while my brush is clean, I'm gonna get some more yellow. And now I'm gonna dip into the, can you see how that's a much brighter green? Because Antwerp already has a little bit of yellow in it. So it'll go really bright green. This one's more true blue, and if I use the French Ultramarine blue, it actually has a little red in it. It'll go more subdued, because red and greens are complementary colors. And I could go over here and see that's a real springy green. How pretty is that? So now I already have 3 greens on my palette. You can see I do not have greens on my palette as a color out of the tube. I'm a big believer in mixing your own greens. Don't ever use a green straight out of the tube without pushing it a little bit, putting a little yellow in, putting a little red in, or putting a little blue in, so that it becomes, a more interesting green. And in general, it's a very important skill to be able to mix your own greens. So that's just my take on it. And you can, if you don't agree with me, you should just listen to some other artists, because they don't all agree with me. But that's like where I'm coming from. I like to be able to have my greens mixed from what I do, from the colors I'm already using in my painting. So that way you create unity. So all the colors I'm using now are all color, they're already in the background. The only one that was not in the background was the Opera Rose. But you can see, I splattered in a little bit of that Quinacridone red that I used to darken my opera with. And it turned out good, because now when I'm beginning to paint these flowers, flower heads and little buds, then your brain is beginning to think, I wonder if there's some little buds back there, right? So I'm kind of giving you the idea that maybe there's more, which there is. If you look at the painting or the pictures, can you see here? You see how some of them are really fussed out, right? But they're there because, obviously these don't exist in a vacuum. They're on a little tree that has a bunch of branches. All right, so that was an awful lot of talk about all that. So let's just clean my brush out. And these are tiny little areas, but I'm kind of working with a big brush. Not super big, this is number 12. But because it has a really good tip, see, like it comes to a really fine point, I can work in tiny little areas with it. And I'm not a big fan of working with the little tiny itsy bitsy brushes, if I can do it with a bigger one. So here, I think the wise thing will be is to kind of treat this whole area as one. So I'm going down to the little branch and up here and putting a little bit of water in. Can you see where I put the water in? The whole way. And I will most likely just dip into a little bit of the yellow, and I'm going to start it up here. I'm putting a little bit of yellow in there, and I'm also putting a little bit of yellow in here. Okay, I'm not painting that other bud, just this one and this one. So now I'm putting a little bit of yellow in those two, what were they called? Sepals. And now I'm going to dip into a little bit of that green I created, and I'm going to put some of that on here.
Did you make the stem wet first?
Yes, I did make the stem wet. And so now I'm going to just drag that green up here and up here. And now it's going to mix with that yellow and become even lighter green. Can you see that? Nice, I like that. And then this one here, I actually should also, I'll pull it out here because I know that that part of the bud's going to be a little green. On that other, there's a side bud. And then, I will probably take a little bit of maybe my red. Red and green, I just told you, complementary colors, right? So, because I don't really want this here. So, this is going to be the underside. So, I'm putting a little bit of that red in. And I'm not even going to lift that out. I'm going to dip into a little bit of that darker green. A little bit more. I really don't want it to read red, but I want it to read more brown because, you know, that's the that's a little piece of the twig that these little buds are sitting on, and that would be more brown. So I'm going to have to go to town and do a little bit of a stronger green. So this is too red for me, but I'm not panicking just yet because I know that the opposite to red is green. And I also know that if I put enough green on top of my red, it's going to tone it way down. Can you see it's happening? And then if it gets too green on me, I go into my red. And I want it dark down here. And so I'm basically creating a brown from the red and the green. Can you see that? It's getting more brownish. I like that. And by doing it like this, I might lift out just a little bit here. I did that with what's called a thirsty brush. So that's just a brush where I squeeze out all the water. So it's just damp. And then you can see when I stick it in here to wet paint, can you see how it's soaking it up? It's thirsty. Can you see that gives a little bit because the light's coming from up here. So I wanted to have the top of this little branch lighter and the bottom darker. And I can push and pull a little bit more. Maybe I'll just mix a brown color over here. A little bit more of that. And then give it one more little shot in the arm of that. There. Can you see how by doing it like that, it paints itself because the colors are mixing. But I'm using my knowledge of color theory and also a little technique. I mean, the thirsty brush. So there. And now I think I should stop all my messing around. But see how lovely you have transitions there? Yeah, there's no hard lines, really and nice. It looks very organic. Yeah. There you have it. So then I have a couple more petals. I could paint those because now things are dry. So I'm going to go in with some of the red. And I, in the meantime, should have mixed a little bit more of that pink. There's that. Here, it's the pink. There. And here I'm choosing to not, you remember the other times I put a little water inside the petal first? Well, this time I'm just not going to do it. You can do, you know, different ways. There's different ways of doing this. I'm just going to treat this whole area as one. I don't know if it is, but now it is. And then I can, so I just deposited a bunch of that color, rinsed out my brush. Now it's damp, not thirsty, not dripping wet, just damp enough to drag a little bit of that color out. Oops, sorry. Like that. And now I think I probably have to leave it for a little bit. And then, you know, we don't have to have it painted in one go. I just like to get as far as I can. I just am doctoring up this other petal while I could. Hopefully it won't run together. There. Can you see how I'm kind of telling you where the petals are separated? So I have 1 petal, 2 petals, 3 petals, 4 petals. And, you know, I'm going to have to leave it like this. I can't get any further with it. But then next time we can go in and drama it up with putting a little bit more dark on. And this also needs to be probably a little darker at the bottom. But for the first go around, you can take a picture of everything you want. Thanks for watching. Please go to part 2.